James Carter thought inheriting his uncle's abandoned train station was just another burden in his already difficult life. His family laughed at the crumbling building, calling it worthless. But when James discovered a hidden vault beneath the rotting floorboards, containing gold bars, rare stamps, and antique railway bonds worth over $300 million, their laughter turned to stunned silence. This single father's determination to restore what others called a ruin would become the discovery that changed everything. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown railway platform as James Carter stood before the crumbling structure that had suddenly become his inheritance. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and rust stained every visible piece of metal on the abandoned Millbrook station. At 34 years old, James had seen enough disappointment to recognize it when it stared him in the face, but this felt particularly cruel even by his standards. His phone buzzed with another text from his sister Margaret, the latest in a series of increasingly sarcastic messages about his grand inheritance. The family group chat had been merciless since the lawyer's call 3 days ago. His brother David had dubbed it the Pigeon Palace, while his mother Helen had simply asked why Uncle Walter would burden anyone with such a monstrosity. Even his 8-year-old daughter Lucy had wrinkled her nose when she first saw the photos, though she'd quickly added that maybe they could turn it into a playground. James pulled his worn jacket tighter against the October chill and approached the main building. The Victorian-era architecture still held traces of former grandeur beneath layers of neglect and vandalism. Tall arched windows, now boarded up, had once welcomed travelers with natural light. The ornate ironwork that decorated the platform canopy told stories of craftsmanship from a bygone era, even as it slowly succumbed to decades of weather and abandonment. The heavy wooden doors to the main station building groaned in protest as James pushed them open. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Shafts of sunlight pierced through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating particles that danced like tiny spirits in the still air. The ticket counter dominated one wall, its marble surface cracked but still bearing the elegant curves that had once served countless passengers embarking on journeys to distant cities. James ran his fingers along the counter's edge, trying to imagine the station in its heyday. Uncle Walter had been the station master here for over 40 years, retiring only when the railway line closed in the early 1990s. The two men had barely spoken in the last decade, their relationship strained by family politics and Walter's increasingly reclusive nature. James couldn't understand why his uncle had left in this place, especially when Walter knew about the financial struggles that had plagued James since his divorce 2 years ago. His phone rang, startling him from his reverie. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and James reluctantly answered. "So, have you seen your castle yet?" Margaret's voice dripped with amusement. "David drove by yesterday and said it looks even worse in person. The whole family's been talking about it. Mom thinks you should just sell it for scrap metal and be done with it." James walked deeper into the station, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "It's not that bad, Maggie. The structure is still solid. The roof needs work, but the bones are good." "James, honey, you can barely afford to fix the leak in your apartment bathroom. What are you planning to do with an entire train station? The property taxes alone will bankrupt you." Margaret's tone softened slightly, though the condescension remained. "Look, I get it. Uncle Walter meant something to you when we were kids, but this isn't a gift, it's a burden. Just walk away. Just walk away." "I can't just walk away. Lucy loves trains, and maybe there's potential here that nobody else can, Dad." "See." James found himself defending something he wasn't even sure he believed in yet. "Potential?" Margaret laughed. "James, you're a shift manager at a warehouse, not some property developer. This isn't one of those home renovation shows where everything works out perfectly in 30 minutes. This is real life, and real life doesn't have fairy tale endings." After ending the call, James spent the next hour exploring the station's layout. The main waiting area featured rows of wooden benches, many still intact despite the years of neglect. A grand staircase led to what had once been administrative offices on the second floor, though water damage had rendered most of those rooms uninhabitable. The platform outside stretched nearly 200 yards, long enough to accommodate the passenger trains that had once connected this rural community to the broader world. As he walked, James began to see past the decay and abandonment. The station sat on nearly 5 acres of land, much of it overgrown but potentially valuable. The architecture, while damaged, retained enough character to appeal to investors interested in historical restoration projects. Maybe Margaret was wrong. Maybe this wasn't just a burden after all. That evening, James returned to his small apartment where Lucy waited with her homework spread across the kitchen table. His daughter looked up with bright eyes that reminded him painfully of her mother, though without the disappointment that had characterized Sarah's expressions in their final months together. "Daddy, did you see the train station today? Can I come with you tomorrow?" Lucy's enthusiasm provided a stark contrast to his family's negativity. "It's pretty rough right now, sweetheart. Lots of broken glass and unstable floors. But maybe once I clean it up a bit, we can explore together." James sat down beside her, helping with a math problem while his mind remained fixed on the station's possibilities. Lucy nodded seriously, then brightened again. "Maybe we could live there. Like in those old movies where people live in castles. It could be our castle." The innocence of her suggestion struck James deeply. While his family saw only problems and expenses, his daughter saw adventure and possibility. Perhaps that perspective was exactly what he needed to approach this inheritance differently. The next morning brought James back to Millbrook Station armed with cleaning supplies, basic tools, and a newfound determination to prove his family wrong. He started with the main waiting area, sweeping away years of accumulated debris and clearing the boarded windows to let in natural light. The difference was immediately striking. The space transformed from dungeon-like gloom to something approaching its former dignity. As he worked, James began to notice details he'd missed during his initial visit. The ceiling featured intricate plasterwork that had somehow survived decades of water damage. Original brass fittings still adorned the ticket windows, tarnished but potentially restorable. Even the old departure board, though long since disconnected, retained the classic flip-style letters that had once announced arrivals and departures to eager travelers. By midweek, James had established a routine of arriving at the station each morning before his warehouse shift and returning for a few hours each evening. The physical work felt therapeutic, a welcome change from the monotonous demands of his day job. More importantly, he began to see genuine progress. The waiting area looked almost respectable now, and he'd managed to replace several broken windows with salvaged glass from a demolished building across town. His family's attitude remained unchanged, though their comments had evolved from outright mockery to patronizing concern. His mother called twice that week to remind him about the property taxes coming due in December, while David made a point of mentioning several abandoned buildings in their area that had become money pits for their unfortunate Quaybell owners. "I'm just saying, James, you need to be realistic about this," David had said during their phone conversation Wednesday evening. "You've got Lucy to think about. Can you really afford to throw money at this place when she needs things like new school clothes and orthodontics?" The comment stung because it contained enough truth to be genuinely painful. James was indeed struggling financially, working overtime shifts whenever possible, just to cover basic expenses. Lucy's mother paid minimal child support, barely enough to cover daycare costs during James's working hours. Every dollar spent on the station renovation was a dollar not available for Lucy's needs. Yet something about the station called to him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Perhaps it was the connection to Uncle Walter, who had always treated James with more respect and affection than the rest of the family. Or maybe it was simply the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from apparent ruin. Whatever the motivation, James found himself unable to abandon the project, despite his family's constant pressure. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the station. James was replacing rotten floorboards in the ticket office when he heard footsteps echoing in the main waiting area. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway, dressed in a neat coat and carrying herself with a dignity that suggested a lifetime of proper posture and careful attention to appearance. "Excuse me, young man. Are you the new owner of this station?" Her voice carried the refined accent of someone who had received an expensive education decades ago. James set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Yes, ma'am. I inherited it from my uncle, Walter Carter. I'm James. The woman's face brightened considerably. Walter's nephew. I'm Eleanor Whitfield. I live in the big white house, about a mile down the road. Walter and I were friends for many years, and I must say, it's wonderful to see someone caring for this place again. As they talked, Eleanor shared stories about the station's golden years. She had been a regular passenger in the 1960s and 70s, taking the morning train to her job at a law firm in the city, and returning each evening to her rural home. The station had been the heart of their small community, a gathering place where neighbors caught up on local news while waiting for their trains. Your uncle loved this place more than anything, Eleanor said, running her hand along the restored ticket counter. Even after the train stopped running, he would come here every day. He said it was like visiting an old friend. I think he would be very proud of what you're doing. Her words provided James with the encouragement he desperately needed. Here was someone who understood the station's significance beyond mere property values or renovation costs. Eleanor promised to spread the decaying word among longtime residents, many of whom had fond memories of the station and might be willing to help with the restoration effort. That weekend, James brought Lucy to see his progress. Her reaction exceeded his most optimistic expectations. She ran through the cleaned waiting area with arms outstretched, pretending to be an airplane, then insisted on helping him sweep the platform. Together they discovered a family of rabbits living in the overgrown garden area, which delighted Lucy beyond measure. "Daddy, this place is magical," she declared while they shared sandwiches on the newly cleaned platform benches. "It's like a secret kingdom that nobody knows about except us." Her joy was infectious, reminding James why he'd started this project in the first place. This wasn't just about proving his family wrong or honoring Uncle Walter's memory. This was about creating something meaningful for his daughter, a place where her imagination could flourish away from the cramped confines of their apartment. The following week brought both progress and setbacks. James managed to restore electricity to most of the main building, a significant step forward that allowed him to work effectively during the darker evening hours. However, he also discovered extensive water damage in the basement area that would require professional remediation, potentially costing thousands of dollars he didn't have. Tuesday evening found him sitting on the platform, staring at estimates from contractors and trying to figure out how to afford the necessary repairs. The numbers were sobering. Even the most basic restoration would cost far more than his annual salary. And that didn't include the ongoing property taxes and maintenance expenses. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Mom says you missed dinner Sunday. Hope you're not getting too obsessed with that train station project. Remember what happened to Cousin Rick with his boat restoration? Some projects just aren't worth the cost." The comparison to Cousin Rick's infamous boat project, which had consumed 5 years and $30,000 before ending in bankruptcy, felt particularly cruel. James knew his family meant well, but their constant negativity was beginning to wear him down. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was being foolish to think he could transform this abandoned station into something worthwhile. As he prepared to leave that evening, James decided to take one final look at the basement area to better understand the extent of the water damage. He descended the narrow staircase carefully, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the cramped space. The basement had clearly been used for storage in the station's operational days, with built-in shelving units still lining the walls. Most of the wooden cross shelves had rotted away, leaving only metal brackets anchored to the brick walls. But in the far corner, James noticed something unusual. The floorboards in that area appeared newer than the rest, as if they had been replaced at some point. More intriguingly, the wood showed signs of recent disturbance, despite the basement's overall appearance of abandonment. Curiosity overcoming caution, James knelt down and examined the suspicious floorboards more closely. They were definitely different from the original flooring, made from a different type of wood and installed with modern screws rather than the square-headed nails used throughout the rest of the building. When he pressed down on one board, it flexed slightly, suggesting that the subfloor beneath might be compromised or even hollow. James retrieved a crowbar from his tool collection upstairs and returned to investigate further. The first floorboard came up easily, revealing not the expected dirt foundation, but rather a wooden framework that seemed to be concealing something below. As he removed additional boards, the outline of what appeared to be a hidden staircase became visible. His heart racing with excitement and apprehension, James cleared away enough flooring to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The stairs appeared to be original to the building, constructed with the same craftsmanship evident throughout the rest of the station. However, they'd been carefully concealed, suggesting that someone had gone to considerable effort to hide whatever lay below. With his phone's flashlight providing inadequate illumination, James returned to his car to retrieve a proper flashlight. The beam revealed that the hidden staircase descended approximately 10 feet before terminating at a heavy wooden door. The door bore no markings or hardware visible from above, but appeared to be in remarkably good condition considering its concealed location. James descended the stairs slowly, testing each step before committing his full weight. The air grew noticeably cooler as he went deeper, and he detected a faint metallic smell that he couldn't identify. At the bottom, the wooden door proved to be unlocked, opening with surprising ease to reveal a small chamber beyond. The flashlight beam swept across the chamber, and James gasped at what he saw. The space was roughly 12 feet square, with brick walls that appeared to be original to the building's construction. But it was the chamber's contents that left him speechless. Along one wall stood a massive steel vault, the kind used by banks in the early 20th century. The vault door was slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of what appeared to be wooden crates stacked inside. James approached the vault with trembling hands, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. The steel door, despite its age, moved smoothly on well-maintained hinges. Inside, illuminated by his flashlight beam, were dozens of wooden crates of various sizes, all bearing shipping labels and inventory numbers written in faded ink. The first crate he examined was approximately 2 feet square and surprisingly heavy. The shipping label, though yellowed with age, was still legible. It was addressed to W. Carter, Station Master, Millbrook Station, and dated April 15, 1973. The return address indicated it had been shipped from a precious metals dealer in New York City. With shaking fingers, James pried open the crate's lid. Inside, nestled in Excelsior packing material, were a dozen gold bars, each bearing official stamps and serial numbers. The bars felt impossibly heavy and solid, their surfaces unmarked by tarnish or corrosion. James had never seen real gold bars before, but these certainly appeared genuine. The second crate contained similar contents, as did the third. In total, James counted 47 gold bars of various sizes, along with several smaller boxes containing what appeared to be rare coins. But the vault held more than precious metals. Additional crates contained collections of stamps, many in pristine condition and bearing postmarks from countries around the world. One particularly large crate held bundled documents that, upon closer examination, proved to be railway bonds and stock certificates from the 1920s and 30s. James sat heavily on the vault floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his discovery. The gold alone represented wealth beyond his wildest dreams, but the stamps and vintage financial documents could potentially be worth even more to collectors. This hidden vault contained what appeared to be decades of accumulated treasure, carefully preserved and concealed by his Uncle Walter. As the initial shock wore off, practical questions began to form in James's mind. How had Uncle Walter acquired such wealth? Why had he concealed it rather than using it to improve his modest lifestyle? Most importantly, what was James supposed to do with this discovery? He spent the next hour inventorying the vault's contents, taking photographs and making notes on his phone. The gold bars alone numbered 93 pieces of various weights, from small 1-ounce specimens to massive 10-pound ingots. The stamp collection filled 12 large albums, including rare specimens that James recognized from his childhood hobby of stamp collecting. The railway bonds and stock certificates would require expert evaluation, but some bore the names of companies that had become major corporations. By the time James finally climbed the hidden staircase and returned to the main station building, his mind was reeling with possibilities and concerns. This discovery changed everything about his situation, but it also created new complications. The legal ownership of the treasure would need to be established. Taxes would need to be paid, and the entire matter would require discretion until he could determine the best course of action. The next morning, James called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. Instead of heading to the warehouse, he drove directly to the county courthouse to research the station's property records. He needed to understand the legal history of his inheritance and ensure that any treasure found on the property would rightfully belong to him. The records revealed that Uncle Walter had owned the station property outright since 1992, when he purchased it from the railway company for a nominal sum. Previous to that, he had lived in the station master's quarters as part of his employment, but the property itself had belonged to the railroad. This meant that anything found on the property after 1992 would legally belong to Walter's estate, and by extension, to James as his heir. With the legal questions somewhat clarified, James's next step was to determine the actual value of his discovery. He drove to the city library and spent hours researching current gold prices, rare stamp values, and the potential worth of vintage railway securities. The numbers he calculated were staggering. Even conservative estimates suggested the vault's contents could be worth well over $100 million, with optimistic valuations reaching $300 million or more. That evening, James returned to the station with a heavy-duty padlock and additional security measures. The hidden chamber needed to remain secret until he could develop a proper plan for revealing and monetizing the treasure. As he secured the vault and carefully replaced the concealing floorboards, he realized that his life had fundamentally changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. For the first time since his divorce, James felt a sense of genuine optimism about the future. Lucy would be able to attend the best schools, pursue any interests that captured her imagination, and enjoy opportunities that had seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. The financial pressures that had dominated his thoughts for years suddenly seemed manageable, even trivial. But along with the excitement came new concerns. How could he explain his sudden wealth without revealing the treasure's location? How would his family react to the news that their mocked inheritance had made him wealthy beyond their wildest dreams? Most importantly, how could he ensure that Lucy would grow up understanding the value of hard work and generosity, despite inheriting more money than most people could spend in several lifetimes? The following days passed in a blur of research and planning. James consulted with lawyers about tax implications, contacted auction houses about rare stamp valuations, and researched the proper procedures for authenticating precious metals. Throughout this process, he maintained his normal routine of working at the warehouse and continuing the station renovation, not wanting to draw attention to any changes in his circumstances. His family's attitude toward the station project remained unchanged, providing James with a constant source of bitter amusement. During Sunday dinner at his mother's house, David made several jokes about James's money pit, while Margaret suggested he consider therapy to help him accept the reality of his situation. Their mother simply shook her head whenever the station was mentioned, as if the entire project was too foolish to merit serious discussion. Only Lucy continued to show enthusiasm for the restoration work. She accompanied James to the station every weekend, helping with simple tasks and exploring the grounds with boundless energy. Her joy in the place remained untainted by concerns about money or practicality, reminding James that some of life's most valuable treasures couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. 3 weeks after his discovery, James finally contacted a reputable auction house that specialized in precious metals and collectibles. He arranged for a discreet evaluation of selected items from the vault, presenting them as pieces inherited from his uncle without revealing their full scope or location. The expert's assessment confirmed his research. The gold bars were genuine and would command current market prices, while several of the stamps were indeed rare enough to attract serious collectors. Armed with professional validation of the treasure's value, James began developing a long-term plan for managing his newfound wealth. Rather than liquidating everything immediately, he decided to gradually sell items over several years, minimizing tax implications and avoiding the attention that sudden extreme wealth might attract. He also began researching charitable foundations and community development projects, inspired by the idea of using his fortune to benefit others, rather than simply accumulating luxury for himself. The station restoration became both a cover for his activities and a genuine passion project. With unlimited resources now available, James could afford to hire skilled craftsmen to address the structural issues, that had previously seemed insurmountable. He engaged a historical restoration specialist to ensure that any improvements would preserve the building's architectural integrity while making it suitable for modern use. As work progressed, the station began to attract attention from local residents who remembered its former glory. Eleanor Whitfield became a regular visitor, sharing stories and historical photographs that helped guide the restoration effort. Other elderly neighbors contributed memories and artifacts, creating a growing sense of community investment in the project. James found particular satisfaction in the ticket office restoration, where he had first discovered the hidden staircase. The room was transformed into a showcase of railway history, featuring authentic period furnishings and displays of memorabilia donated by local residents. The hidden entrance to the vaults remained undetectable, concealed beneath carefully matched flooring that would fool even close inspection. By early December, the main station building was nearly complete. The waiting area featured restored wooden benches, arranged around a central information kiosk, while the ticket windows had been equipped with reproduction hardware that maintained historical accuracy while meeting modern safety standards. The platform had been rebuilt to original specifications, complete with period-appropriate lighting and signage. The transformation was remarkable, but James's greatest satisfaction came from Lucy's reaction to each improvement. She had claimed the old station master's office as her special space, decorating it with railway posters and toy trains, while using it as a quiet place to read and do homework. The station had become her second home, a magical place where her imagination could flourish without the constraints of their cramped apartment. As Christmas approached, James decided it was time to reveal at least part of his changed circumstances to his family. During their weekly Sunday dinner, he announced that he had received an unexpected windfall from Uncle Walter's estate, enough to complete the station restoration and provide financial security for Lucy's future. The reaction was predictably skeptical. Margaret immediately questioned the source of this supposed windfall, while David suggested that James might be hiding debt or engaging in some form of financial fraud. Their mother demanded to see documentation, convinced that James was either lying or being scammed by unscrupulous people who had recognized his desperation. "James, honey, I know you want to believe there's some magical solution to your problems, but inheritances don't work that way," Margaret said, her tone mixing concern with condescension. "Uncle Walter lived modestly his entire life. Where would he have gotten enough money to make any real difference in your situation?" Rather than arguing or providing detailed explanations, James simply smiled and suggested they visit the station to see the progress for themselves. The following Saturday, his entire family gathered at Millbrook Station for what he privately considered their comeuppance tour. Their reactions to the restored building were gratifying beyond James's wildest expectations. His mother stood speechless in the elegant waiting area, running her fingers along the polished brass fixtures and restored plasterwork. David walked the platform in obvious amazement, commenting on the quality of craftsmanship and attention to historical detail. Even Margaret seemed impressed, though she maintained her skeptical attitude about the project's financial viability. Lucy served as tour guide, proudly showing off her favorite spaces and explaining the historical significance of various features. Her enthusiasm was infectious, gradually warming even the most cynical family members to the project's merits. By the end of their visit, the tone of family conversations about the station had shifted from mockery to grudging admiration. However, James knew that complete vindication would require revealing the true extent of his discovery, something he wasn't yet prepared to do. The treasure represented not just financial security, but also the responsibility of managing wealth in ways that would honor his uncle's memory and benefit his community. He had begun developing plans for a railway museum that would preserve local history while providing educational opportunities for future generations. The new year brought additional progress and new challenges. James had quietly liquidated approximately 10% of the vault's contents, generating enough cash to complete the station restoration and establish substantial trust funds for Lucy's education and future security. However, he also faced increasing scrutiny from local tax authorities, who couldn't understand how an unemployed warehouse worker could afford such an extensive renovation project. To address these concerns, James hired a team of accountants and lawyers specializing in estate planning and wealth management. They helped him establish a complex but legal structure of trusts and charitable foundations that would protect his assets while providing plausible explanations for his apparent prosperity. The story they developed focused on valuable railway memorabilia and historical documents found during the restoration, items that could reasonably be worth significant sums to collectors. Spring brought the station's grand reopening, celebrated with a community festival that attracted visitors from throughout the region. Local newspapers covered the event, praising James's dedication to preserving historical heritage and revitalizing their rural community. The coverage helped establish his reputation as a committed preservationist rather than someone who had stumbled into unexpected wealth. Eleanor Whitfield served as the event's honored guest, cutting the ribbon and sharing memories of the station's golden years. Her speech brought tears to many eyes, particularly when she described how Uncle Walter would have been thrilled to see his beloved station restored to its former glory. James felt a profound sense of connection to his uncle's memory, understanding for the first time the depth of Walter's love for this place. As summer arrived, James had settled into his new role as the station's caretaker and unofficial community historian. The building now served multiple functions, housing a small museum, hosting community events, and providing meeting space for local organizations. The project had evolved beyond simple restoration into genuine community revitalization, attracting new businesses and residents to their previously declining rural area. Lucy thrived in this new environment, developing friendships with children whose families had been drawn to the area by the station's renaissance. She spent her days exploring the grounds, learning about railway history, and helping with various community projects. The shy, quiet child, who had once been confined to their small apartment, had blossomed into a confident, curious girl with a deep appreciation for history and community service. James's relationship with his family had also evolved, moving from skepticism and mockery to genuine respect and admiration. While they still didn't understand the full extent of his transformation, they could no longer deny the reality of his success. Margaret had even begun bringing her own children to visit the station, allowing them to experience the magic that had so captivated Lucy. The financial security provided by the treasure allowed James to pursue projects that extended far beyond the station itself. He quietly funded scholarships for local students, supported elderly residents who needed assistance with home repairs, and invested in small businesses that contributed to the community's economic development. These activities were conducted through his charitable foundation, maintaining his privacy while maximizing their positive impact. One evening in late summer, as James sat on the restored platform watching Lucy chase fireflies in the twilight, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Less than a year ago, he had been a struggling single father, facing an uncertain future, mocked by his family, and burdened by financial stress. The abandoned train station that everyone had dismissed as worthless had indeed proved to be worthless, at least in conventional terms. But the true treasure hadn't been the gold bars or rare stamps hidden in Uncle Walter's secret vault. The real discovery had been the opportunity to create something meaningful, to preserve history, and to build a better future for his daughter and community. The money had certainly made everything possible, but the satisfaction came from the work itself, from seeing abandoned spaces transformed into places of beauty and purpose. As autumn returned and James prepared for the second anniversary of inheriting the station, he finally felt ready to share the complete truth with his family. During their traditional Sunday dinner, he announced that he had something important to tell them about Uncle Walter's legacy and the real source of his recent prosperity. The revelation of the hidden treasure provoked reactions ranging from stunned disbelief to grudging acknowledgement that James had indeed been right to pursue the restoration project. Margaret demanded to see the vault, while David immediately began calculating tax implications and investment strategies. Their mother simply sat in silence, apparently overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her son had discovered and accomplished. "So, all this time, while we were making fun of your crazy project, you were actually sitting on a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" Margaret asked, her voice mixing amazement with embarrassment. James nodded, then explained his decision to keep the discovery secret until he could develop proper plans for managing the wealth responsibly. He described the charitable foundation, the community development projects, and his commitment to ensuring that Lucy would understand the value of hard work despite inheriting substantial wealth. The conversation continued long into the evening, covering everything from the historical significance of Uncle Walter's collection to practical questions about estate planning and wealth management. For the first time in years, James felt truly connected to his family, united by shared amazement at the extraordinary turn his life had taken. As they prepared to leave that night, Eleanor Whitfield called with exciting news. A documentary film crew had contacted her about featuring the station in a program about successful historical preservation projects. The publicity would bring additional visitors and recognition, further cementing the station's role as a catalyst for regional economic development. Standing in the restored waiting area after his family's departure, James felt a profound sense of gratitude for the chain of events that had led to this moment. Uncle Walter's decision to bequeath him the abandoned station had seemed like a burden at the time, just another example of life's tendency to pile problems upon problems. Instead, it had become the foundation for a complete transformation of his circumstances and prospects. The hidden treasure had certainly played a crucial role, providing the financial resources necessary to complete the restoration and establish long-term security. But the real treasure had been the opportunity to prove that determination and vision could triumph over skepticism and conventional wisdom. The family members who had mocked his pigeon palace now proudly brought friends and colleagues to tour the restored station, sharing stories about James's remarkable achievement. More importantly, the project had given Lucy a sense of place and purpose that would serve her well throughout her life. She had learned that beauty could be found in unexpected places, that hard work and persistence could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that individual actions could have profound impacts on entire communities. These lessons would prove far more valuable than any amount of inherited wealth. As James locked the station doors and walked to his car under a canopy of autumn stars, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. A year ago, he had been a single father struggling to make ends meet, dismissed by his family as a dreamer pursuing an impossible project. Tonight, he was a successful preservationist, community leader, and philanthropist with the resources to pursue any goal that captured his imagination. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been accomplished through luck alone. Every day had required decisions about how to use his newfound resources responsibly, how to balance personal desires with community needs, and how to preserve the values that had guided him through more difficult times. The treasure in Uncle Walter's vault had provided the means, but James's character had determined the ends. Looking back at the illuminated station, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness, James felt a sense of completion that went beyond financial success or family vindication. He had taken something abandoned and discarded, something that others had seen only as a burden, and transformed it into a source of beauty, community pride, and historical preservation. In doing so, he had discovered that the most valuable treasures often hide in the most unlikely places, waiting for someone with the vision and determination to uncover their true worth. The abandoned train station that had once been mocked as worthless had indeed changed everything, just not in the way anyone had expected. The real discovery hadn't been the gold and precious items hidden beneath the floorboards, but rather the understanding that with enough faith, hard work, and community support, even the most hopeless situations could be transformed into something extraordinary. As James drove home to the comfortable house he and Lucy now shared near the station, he smiled at the thought of tomorrow's possibilities. There were more projects to consider, more ways to use his resources for positive community impact, and more opportunities to demonstrate that the greatest treasures in life often come disguised as burdens. Waiting for someone brave enough to look beyond surface appearances and discover their hidden potential. The $300 million discovery had certainly shocked his family and changed his circumstances. But the real transformation had been personal, a journey from despair to hope, from isolation to community leadership, and from financial stress to the freedom to pursue meaningful work. Uncle Walter's final gift hadn't just been the treasure hidden in the vault, it had been the opportunity to discover his own capabilities and values under circumstances that tested both his determination and his character. In the end, The abandoned train station had indeed made James wealthy, but not in the way that anyone, including James himself, had initially understood wealth. The money provided security and opportunity, but the real treasure was the knowledge that he possessed the vision, determination, and character necessary to transform apparent disaster into genuine triumph. That discovery, worth far more than any amount of gold or precious stamps, would guide and sustain him for the rest of his life. The documentary crew arrived in early October, bringing with them a level of professional attention that transformed the quiet rural community into a temporary hub of media activity. The producer, a woman named Catherine Rhodes, who specialized in historical preservation stories, had been following the station's restoration through social media posts and local newspaper coverage. She immediately recognized the potential for a compelling narrative about individual determination triumphing over seemingly impossible odds. James found himself somewhat uncomfortable with the attention, having grown accustomed to working quietly behind the scenes rather than serving as the public face of the restoration project. However, he understood that the documentary would bring valuable publicity to their community development efforts and potentially inspire similar projects elsewhere. The filming process provided an opportunity to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point, while also highlighting the contributions of community members who had supported the project. Catherine's crew spent 3 weeks documenting every aspect of the station's transformation, from interviews with longtime residents who remembered its original glory, to detailed footage of the restoration techniques used to preserve historical authenticity. Eleanor Whitfield proved to be a natural storyteller, sharing memories and historical context that brought the station's past to vivid life. Her descriptions of bustling platforms filled with travelers, the excitement of holiday departures, and the sad day when the last train pulled away forever provided emotional weight that elevated the documentary scene. Beyond simple preservation advocacy, the filming process also revealed details about Uncle Walter's life that James had never known. Several elderly residents shared stories about Walter's dedication to maintaining the station, even after official operations ceased, his extensive knowledge of railway history, and his quiet generosity toward community members facing difficult times. These revelations helped James understand his uncle's character more deeply, recognizing in Walter the same commitment to community service that now motivated his own philanthropic efforts. One particularly moving interview featured Harold Patterson, a man in his 80s who had worked alongside Walter during the station's final years of operation. Harold revealed that Walter had often spoken about his nephew James, expressing hope that someday the young man would understand the value of preserving beautiful things for future generations. This conversation, captured on camera, brought tears to James's eyes and provided additional validation for his decision to pursue the restoration despite his family's initial skepticism. During the documentary production, James also learned more about the treasure's origins through research conducted by Catherine's team. Historical records indicated that Uncle Walter had inherited a substantial collection of railway memorabilia and investments from his own mentor, an elderly station master who had worked during the industry's golden age in the early 20th century. This gentleman, Marcus Fitzgerald, had been a shrewd investor who converted his modest salary into significant wealth through careful purchases of railway stocks, precious metals, and collectible stamps. The documentation revealed that Marcus had specifically chosen Walter as his successor, recognizing in the younger man a shared passion for railway history and a commitment to preserving valuable artifacts for posterity. Walter had continued Marcus's investment strategies while adding his own acquisitions, gradually building the collection that James had discovered in the hidden vault. The secrecy surrounding the treasure had been motivated by Walter's desire to protect the collection from theft or government seizure during various economic and political upheavals throughout the decades. Understanding this history helped James appreciate the responsibility he had inherited, along with the wealth. He wasn't simply the lucky beneficiary of his uncle's good fortune, but rather the latest guardian of a collection that represented decades of careful stewardship by multiple generations. This realization strengthened his commitment to using the treasure's value for purposes that would honor both Walter's memory and Marcus's original vision of preserving railway heritage for future generations. The documentary's release in the spring generated national attention that exceeded everyone's expectations. The story of a single father transforming an abandoned train station into a thriving community center resonated with audiences across the country, particularly during a time when many rural communities were struggling with economic decline and population loss. The film won several awards at documentary festivals and was eventually picked up by a major streaming platform, bringing international recognition to James's achievement. This publicity generated unexpected opportunities and challenges. Tourism to the restored station increased dramatically, requiring James to develop proper visitor management systems and expand the museum's educational offerings. He hired additional staff, including several local residents who had been struggling with unemployment, creating jobs that strengthened the community's economic foundation. The increased visitor traffic also benefited local restaurants, shops, and bed-and-breakfast establishments, generating a multiplier effect that revitalized the entire region. However, the attention also brought scrutiny from various government agencies and tax authorities who wanted to understand how James had financed such an extensive restoration project. His team of accountants and lawyers worked diligently to ensure full compliance with all applicable regulations while protecting his privacy and that of his charitable foundation. The process was complicated and expensive, but it ultimately validated the legitimacy of his activities and provided a framework for future philanthropic endeavors. The increased visibility led to invitations to speak at conferences about historical preservation, rural economic development, and community revitalization. James initially declined most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on local projects rather than becoming a celebrity spokesperson. However, he gradually recognized that sharing his experience could inspire others to pursue similar initiatives in their own communities, potentially multiplying the positive impact of his work. His first major speaking engagement was at a national conference of historical preservation societies, where he presented a detailed case study of the station restoration project. The presentation focused on practical aspects of financing, community engagement, and balancing historical authenticity with modern functionality. The audience's enthusiastic response surprised James, who had expected questions about technical restoration techniques rather than broader philosophical discussions about the value of preserving cultural heritage. The conference connections led to consulting opportunities with other communities interested in similar projects. James found himself advising groups across the country who were struggling to preserve historic buildings, develop heritage tourism, or revitalize declining downtown areas. These consulting engagements provided additional income that he channeled back into his charitable foundation, creating a sustainable funding source for ongoing community development projects. Lucy adapted remarkably well to their changed circumstances, though James remained vigilant about ensuring that wealth didn't corrupt her values or work ethic. She continued attending the local public school, rather than transferring to an expensive private institution, maintaining friendships with children from diverse economic backgrounds. Her favorite activities remained simple pleasures, like exploring the station grounds, reading in the restored station master's office, and helping with community events, rather than expensive entertainment or luxury purchases. The family dynamics continued evolving as the reality of James's transformation became undeniable. Margaret had initially struggled with feelings of embarrassment about her earlier skepticism, but gradually embraced her role as the sister of a successful preservationist and philanthropist. She began volunteering with the charitable foundation, using her professional marketing skills to promote various community development initiatives. Her children became regular visitors to the station, developing their own appreciation for history and community service. David's reaction was more complex, mixing genuine admiration for James's achievement with lingering resentment about being proven wrong so dramatically. However, his financial expertise proved valuable in managing the foundation's investments and ensuring compliance with various regulatory requirements. Over time, he developed a grudging respect for James's vision and commitment, eventually becoming one of the project's most effective advocates within their extended family and professional networks. Their mother Helen struggled most with accepting the dramatic reversal of family fortunes and dynamics. For decades, she had viewed James as the least successful of her children, someone who needed guidance and protection, rather than someone capable of achieving remarkable success. The documentary's portrayal of James as a visionary leader challenged her fundamental assumptions about her son's capabilities and character. However, her pride in his achievement eventually overcame her initial discomfort, and she became one of the station's most enthusiastic promoters among her social circle. The second anniversary of the station's reopening brought additional milestones and recognitions. The State Historical Society designated the building as an official landmark, ensuring its protection for future generations while providing access to preservation grants and technical expertise. The federal government's National Park Service expressed interest in including the station in their network of historically significant sites, a designation that would bring additional visitors and recognition while establishing strict standards for ongoing maintenance and interpretation. James used the anniversary celebration to announce several new initiatives funded by his charitable foundation. These included a scholarship program for local students interested in pursuing careers in historical preservation, museum management, or related fields. The foundation also launched a small business development program, providing low-interest loans and technical assistance to entrepreneurs interested in starting ventures that would contribute to the region's economic diversity and cultural vitality. One of the most ambitious new projects was the development of a heritage railway line that would connect the restored station to other historically significant sites in the region. This initiative required coordination with multiple government agencies, railway companies, and preservation organizations, but promised to create a major tourist attraction that would benefit communities throughout the area. James committed to providing the initial funding for feasibility studies and planning activities, with the understanding that eventual construction would require partnerships with various public and private entities. The Heritage Railway project also provided an opportunity to honor Uncle Walter's memory in a particularly meaningful way. James commissioned the restoration of a vintage steam locomotive that would serve as the centerpiece of the Heritage Line's fleet. The locomotive, built in the 1920s and retired in the 1960s, required extensive mechanical work to return it to operational condition. However, the symbolic value of having a working steam train serve the restored station seemed worth the considerable expense and effort required. As winter approached, James found himself reflecting on the profound changes that had occurred in just 2 years. The abandoned building that his family had mocked as worthless had become the foundation for a thriving enterprise that employed dozens of people and attracted thousands of visitors annually. More importantly, it had become a symbol of hope and possibility for rural communities struggling with economic decline and demographic challenges. The financial security provided by Uncle Walter's treasure had certainly made everything possible. But James recognized that money alone couldn't have created the community support and enthusiasm that had sustained the project through various challenges and setbacks. The true success had come from his willingness to share his vision with others, to listen to their suggestions and concerns, and to adapt his plans based on their input and expertise. Lucy's development during this period had been particularly gratifying to observe. The shy, withdrawn child who had once been confined to their cramped apartment had blossomed into a confident, articulate young person with a deep appreciation for history and community service. She served as an unofficial junior docent at the Station Museum, delighting visitors with her encyclopedic knowledge of railway history and infectious enthusiasm for the restoration project. Her academic performance had also improved dramatically, not because of expensive tutoring or private school advantages, but because she now had a sense of purpose and belonging that motivated her to excel. Teachers noted her increased confidence in classroom discussions, her willingness to take on leadership roles in group projects, and her genuine curiosity about subjects ranging from history and bian, architecture to business and environmental science. The approach of the holiday season brought additional opportunities to demonstrate the station's community value. James organized a Victorian Christmas celebration that featured period decorations, historical reenactments, and traditional crafts demonstrations. Local artisans and performers contributed their talents, creating an event that attracted visitors from throughout the region while showcasing the area's cultural resources and creative capabilities. The celebration's success led to discussions about developing a series of seasonal events that would provide year-round programming and steady visitor traffic. These might include a spring garden tour highlighting native plants and sustainable landscaping, a summer railway heritage festival featuring vintage equipment and historical demonstrations, and a fall harvest celebration showcasing local agricultural products and traditional preservation techniques. Each of these events would serve multiple purposes, providing entertainment and education for visitors, while creating economic opportunities for local residents and businesses. The programming would also help establish the station as a regional cultural center, rather than simply a single attraction destination, encouraging repeat visits and longer stays that would maximize the economic impact of heritage tourism. As the year drew to a close, James received an unexpected visit from a representative of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. The museum had learned about the station restoration through the documentary and various media coverage, and was interested in discussing potential partnerships and collaborative projects. The possibility of having some of Uncle Walter's railway collection featured in national exhibitions was both exciting and daunting, representing another level of recognition for the preservation work, while also requiring careful consideration of loan agreements and insurance arrangements. The Smithsonian representative was particularly interested in the collection's documentation of small-town railway operations during the mid-20th century, a period and perspective that was underrepresented in the museum's existing holdings. Several of Uncle Walter's photographs, correspondence files, and operational records could provide valuable insights into the social and economic impact of railway transportation on rural communities during the industry's decline. These discussions opened up possibilities for academic research partnerships that could enhance the station's educational value while contributing to scholarly understanding of transportation history and rural development patterns. James began exploring relationships with university programs in history, museum studies, and historic preservation that might be interested in using the station as a case study or field research site. The academic connections also provided opportunities for internship programs that would give students practical experience in museum operations, historical research, and community development while providing the station with additional staffing and fresh perspectives. These programs could help ensure the long-term sustainability of the station's operations while creating pathways for young people to pursue careers in heritage preservation and cultural tourism. As James looked ahead to the coming year, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction about the progress achieved and excitement about future possibilities. The abandoned train station that had once seemed like an impossible burden had become the foundation for a thriving enterprise that demonstrated the potential for individual vision and determination to create positive change, even in challenging circumstances. The $300 million treasure hidden beneath the floorboards had certainly provided the financial resources necessary to achieve this transformation. But the real treasure had been the community of people who had supported the project and helped bring it to fruition. Eleanor Whitfield's historical knowledge, Harold Patterson's memories of Uncle Walter, Catherine Rhodes's documentary expertise, and countless other contributions had been essential to the project's success. Most importantly, the experience had taught James that the greatest satisfaction came not from accumulating wealth or achieving recognition, but from using whatever resources and abilities he possessed, create something meaningful and lasting. The station restoration had provided opportunities for learning, growth, and service that had enriched his life far beyond any material benefits. Looking at Lucy as she helped decorate the station for the Christmas celebration, James felt confident that these lessons would guide her own development as she grew into adulthood. She had learned that beautiful things were worth preserving, that hard work and persistence could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that individual actions could have profound impacts on entire communities. These values, more precious than any amount of inherited wealth, would serve her well regardless of whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The abandoned train station had indeed changed everything, transforming not just James's financial circumstances, but his understanding of what was truly valuable in life. The discovery that had shocked his mocking family had become the foundation for a legacy of community service and cultural preservation that would continue benefiting future generations long after the original treasure had been spent. As snow began falling outside the station's restored windows, casting a peaceful quiet over the platform where passengers had once waited for trains to carry them to distant destinations. James felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment. The man who had once struggled to pay basic bills was now in a position to fund scholarships, create jobs, and preserve history for posterity. More importantly, he had discovered that the greatest treasures in life often come disguised as burdens, waiting for someone with enough faith and determination to uncover their hidden potential. The story that had begun with family mockery and financial desperation had evolved into something far more meaningful than anyone could have imagined. Uncle Walter's final gift hadn't just been the treasure hidden in the vault, but the opportunity to discover the transformative power of vision, persistence, and community cooperation. That discovery, worth far more than $300 million in gold and precious collectibles, would continue guiding James's choices and inspiring others for years to come. The new year brought unexpected challenges that tested James's resolve and leadership in ways he hadn't anticipated. A severe winter storm in January caused significant damage to the station's newly restored roof, requiring emergency repairs that couldn't wait for insurance settlements or contractor schedules. James found himself working alongside local volunteers in sub-freezing temperatures, replacing damaged slate tiles and reinforcing structural supports to prevent further deterioration. The storm damage revealed both the fragility of historical preservation work and the strength of the community bonds that had formed around the station project. Neighbors who had initially been skeptical about the restoration arrived with tools, materials, and hot coffee, working without expectation of payment to protect what had become their shared cultural treasure. Eleanor Whitfield, despite her advanced age, organized a rotation of volunteers to ensure continuous progress, while James coordinated with professional contractors and insurance representatives. The repair work provided an opportunity to implement additional improvements that hadn't been included in the original restoration plans. James decided to install a modern climate control system that would better protect the museum exhibits and provide more comfortable conditions for year-round programming. The system's design required careful integration with the building's historical architecture, necessitating consultation with specialists who understood both preservation requirements and modern mechanical bow systems. During the repair process, workers discovered additional historical artifacts that had been concealed within the building's walls during various renovation projects over the decades. These included original blueprints from the station's construction in the 1880s, correspondence between railway officials and local government leaders, and several photographs documenting the building's evolution through different periods of use. James carefully preserved these discoveries, recognizing their value for understanding the station's complete history rather than just its operational period. The artifacts also provided clues about other potentially significant locations within the building that hadn't been thoroughly explored. A reference in one document to secondary storage facilities suggested that Uncle Walter's hidden vault might not be the only concealed space within the station complex. James quietly investigated these possibilities during evening hours when the building was closed to visitors, not wanting to create speculation or security concerns about additional treasures. His explorations revealed several small storage areas that had been sealed off during various renovation projects, though none contained anything as significant as the original vault discovery. However, one space behind the ticket office yielded a collection of Uncle Walter's personal papers, including detailed journals documenting his thoughts about the station's history, his investment strategies, and his hopes for the building's eventual restoration. These journals provided intimate insights into Walter's character and motivations that helped James better understand his uncle's decision to leave him this complicated inheritance. The journals revealed that Walter had been monitoring James's life from a distance, noting his struggles as a single father and his efforts to provide Lucy with opportunities despite limited resources. Walter had specifically chosen James as his heir because he recognized qualities of determination and integrity that he believed would be essential for properly managing both the station and the hidden treasure. The decision hadn't been arbitrary or sentimental, but rather a calculated choice based on Walter's assessment of who could best carry forward his preservation mission. Reading these private reflections deepened James's sense of responsibility and connection to his uncle's legacy. Walter had trusted him with far more than financial resources. He had entrusted him with a vision of how individual commitment could create lasting positive change. This understanding influenced James's approach to new projects and partnerships, always considering whether proposed activities aligned with Walter's values of community service and historical preservation. Spring brought the long-awaited arrival of the restored steam locomotive that would anchor the Heritage Railway project. The engine, a magnificent example of 1920s craftsmanship, had required 18 months of meticulous restoration by specialists who understood both the mechanical complexity and historical significance of vintage railway equipment. James had spared no expense in ensuring that every component was either properly restored or replaced with period-appropriate materials. The locomotive's arrival created tremendous excitement throughout the community and attracted media attention from railway enthusiasts across the country. The engine's first test runs on the newly constructed Heritage Line drew hundreds of spectators who had never seen a working steam locomotive in operation. Lucy was among the first passengers, her face glowing with excitement as the restored train carried her through countryside that had been silent of train whistles for over 30 years. The Heritage Railway's opening ceremony featured speeches from state officials, railway historians, and community leaders who recognized the project's significance for both preservation and economic development. The governor attended personally, praising James's vision and commitment while announcing state funding for additional heritage tourism initiatives that would complement the railway project. The event generated substantial media coverage that positioned the region as an emerging destination for heritage tourism and cultural programming. However, the success also brought new pressures and responsibilities that James hadn't fully anticipated. Managing the railway operation required specialized knowledge of vintage equipment maintenance, safety regulations, and passenger service standards that went far beyond the museum and event programming he had previously handled. He found himself recruiting additional staff with specific expertise in railway operations, insurance management, and visitor services. The complexity of running multiple interconnected enterprises began consuming more of James's time and energy than he had expected. Between the museum operations, heritage railway management, charitable foundation activities, and various consulting commitments, he was working longer hours than ever before despite his financial security. Lucy began expressing concerns about his availability for school events and family time, reminding him that success shouldn't come at the expense of their relationship. Her concerns prompted James to reevaluate his priorities and delegate more responsibilities to qualified managers and staff members. He hired an executive director for the charitable foundation, a museum curator with advanced credentials in railway history, and an operations manager for the Heritage Railway project. These appointments freed him to focus on strategic planning and family time while ensuring that day-to-day operations continued smoothly under professional management. The delegation process was initially difficult for James, who had become accustomed to personal involvement in every aspect of the station's operations. However, he gradually learned to trust his staff's expertise and judgment, while maintaining oversight of major decisions and policy directions. This transition marked another stage in his personal development, from hands-on restoration worker to institutional leader and philanthropist. Summer brought record visitor numbers that strained the station's capacity and infrastructure in ways that revealed the need for additional expansion and development. Parking facilities proved inadequate for peak season crowds, while the museum's limited space couldn't accommodate the educational programming demands from school groups and tour organizations. James began planning a comprehensive expansion that would address these capacity issues while maintaining the building's historical character and community focus. The expansion plans included construction of a separate visitor center that would house expanded museum exhibits, educational facilities, and administrative offices while leaving the original station building available for its primary historical interpretation mission. The new facility would be designed to complement the existing architecture while incorporating modern accessibility features and environmental systems that would support year-round programming. Funding for the expansion would come primarily from James's charitable foundation, supplemented by grants from historical preservation organizations and economic development agencies. However, The scale of the project required careful planning to ensure that growth didn't overwhelm the community's capacity to absorb increased visitor traffic and economic activity. James worked closely with local government officials and business leaders to develop comprehensive plans that would maximize benefits while minimizing disruption to residents' quality of life. The planning process also revealed opportunities for additional community development initiatives that could leverage the station's success for broader regional benefit. These included workforce development programs that would train local residents for careers in tourism, hospitality, and heritage industries, as well as small business incubation services that would help entrepreneurs develop ventures that complemented the station's programming and visitor services. As autumn approached, James received an unexpected invitation that would test his commitment to maintaining focus on local community development rather than pursuing national recognition and opportunities. A major television network offered him a hosting position for a new series about historical preservation and community revitalization projects across America. The opportunity would provide a substantial salary, national exposure, and the chance to inspire preservation efforts in communities throughout the country. The offer was tempting, representing validation of his expertise and the potential to multiply his impact through media exposure. However, accepting would require extensive travel that would take him away from Lucy, the station operations, and the ongoing community development work that had become central to his identity and purpose. The decision forced him to consider whether his primary obligation was to his local community or to the broader preservation movement that could benefit from his experience and visibility. After careful consideration and extensive discussions with Lucy, his family, and key staff members, James declined the television opportunity in favor of maintaining his focus on local projects and regional development. However, he negotiated a consulting arrangement that would allow him to contribute expertise to selected episodes while remaining based at the station and available for his primary responsibilities. The decision reinforced his commitment to the values that had guided his transformation from struggling single father to successful preservationist and philanthropist. Rather than pursuing maximum personal recognition or financial gain, he chose to honor the trust that Uncle Walter had placed in him and the relationships he had built within his adopted community. This choice reflected the maturity and wisdom that had developed through his experiences managing unexpected wealth and responsibility. The approaching holiday season brought opportunities to reflect on the remarkable journey that had transformed his life over the past 3 years. The abandoned train station that his family had mocked as worthless had become the centerpiece of a thriving cultural and economic enterprise that employed over 50 people and attracted more than 100,000 visitors annually. More importantly, it had become a symbol of hope and possibility that inspired similar projects in communities throughout the region. Lucy's development during this period had exceeded his most optimistic expectations. She had grown into a confident, articulate young person with a deep appreciation for history, community service, and the value of hard work. Her academic performance ranked among the top students in her class, while her leadership in school activities and volunteer work demonstrated the character development that wealth alone could never have provided. The family relationships that had been strained by years of financial struggle and mutual disappointment had been transformed by success into sources of mutual support and shared pride. Margaret now served as the foundation's marketing director, using her professional skills to promote community development initiatives throughout the region. David had become the organization's chief financial officer, ensuring that resources were managed responsibly and in compliance with all applicable regulations. Even their mother had found a meaningful role as a volunteer coordinator, organizing community events and visitor services with the organizational skills she had developed through decades of civic involvement. As James stood on the restored platform one snowy December evening, watching Lucy help decorate the station for their 3rd annual Victorian Christmas celebration, he felt profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The treasure hidden beneath the floorboards had certainly provided the financial foundation for everything that followed, but the real transformation had been personal, social, and spiritual rather than merely economic. The abandoned train station had taught him that the most valuable discoveries often come disguised as burdens, waiting for someone with enough vision and determination to recognize their hidden potential. Uncle Walter's gift, hadn't just been the $300 million treasure, but the opportunity to discover his own capabilities for leadership, service, and community building. That discovery, worth far more than any amount of gold or precious collectibles, would continue guiding his choices and inspiring others for generations to come.